Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of STEM Girls Virtual, where we talk all about careers in the STEM fields. Those fields are science, technology, engineering, and math. And today we are joined by Dr. Denice Robertson, who is a faculty member in the Department of Biological Sciences at Northern Kentucky University. Hi, Dr. Robertson. How are you today?
I'm good, Becca. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, hanging in there, hanging out at home, enjoying some sunshine. So thank
Yeah,
you so
definitely.
much for joining us today, and we're going to jump into some questions if that's okay with you.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. So the first question is, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you in particular do at Northern Kentucky University?
Sure. So part of my job involves teaching our undergraduate students. I have the pleasure of teaching ecology, evolution, ecology lab, introduction to biology to our freshmen, and one of my favorite courses, the ecology and geology of coral reefs. It's an opportunity that I get to do and take students down to Belize for part of that course. In addition to teaching, I also do some research. And finally, the last part of my job, I'm one of the co-directors for our Center for Teaching and Learning, which helps to provide trainings for faculty and staff so that their classroom work is at the highest standard possible.
Very interesting. And then can you kind of define what ecology is for us, for some of our viewers who might not be really sure?
Sure. So ecology is the study of the interaction between organisms and their environment. There are lots of different options of the things that you can study, which is really one of the reasons that I enjoy ecology so much. Ecology is set up kind of like this nice little hierarchy. So you can study the individual, or you can bump it up a notch and go to the population. So looking at one single species and all of the individuals that live together in a particular area. You can go even higher and look at the community, looking at all of the different species that are interacting and living in a particular area. And you can move up and talk about the community, as well as what we call the non-living or abiotic part of the environment. So things like water levels, temperatures, nutrients, and all of those kinds of things. And it's an amazing opportunity to be able to combine work with colleagues at different levels and look at different organisms in different environments, and the same sort of backbone ideas of ecology hold no matter what environment that you're working in.
Very interesting. And then you mentioned that you do some research. What are you researching right now in particular?
Sure. So one of my colleagues and I are looking at restoration of pollinator habitat. So one of the aspects that we're looking at is the performance of milkweed in areas that have been restored around Greater Cincinnati. So a lot of our parks and the Nature Center and other organizations have worked to put in different pollinator habitat. And so one of the things we're doing is really looking at how well milkweed is doing in those restored habitats, since it's such an important plant for the monarch butterfly. In addition to sort of surveying these different areas, we're also planting new areas, studying different seed mixes to try to get a handle on how milkweed does when it's just put out in these organized seed mixes, where we either have lots of grasses, or maybe we have lots of flowering plants and fewer grasses, or we have an equal number of grasses and flowers. So we want to try to explore how the milkweed does in those different situations. Hopefully we would then be able to make some recommendations to folks in their restoration efforts.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. So our next question is, can you tell us what sparked your interest in this field? Was it something that you were always really interested in? Was it something that you kind of grew into? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So as a kid, I remember going to our nature center for summer camps and to go hiking and do different activities, and just thought it was fabulous getting outside and exploring and finding all the animals and different things. And I don't think at that point in time I really considered that you could actually have a job doing this. And so for a long time, I wanted to be a medical doctor. until kind of in high school. I think I finally clued into the idea that you could actually have a job doing, this kind of outdoor nature kinds of things. And I really started, well, I love Jacques Cousteau. And so I think that really kind of pushed me in the direction of marine ecology. But I wasn't convinced at the time yet. I think I just kind of had this idea in the back of my head. So for my undergraduate, I did a general ecology degree, which gave me, like I said, sort of that backbone in that ecology field. And then you can apply it to whatever area you're interested in. And so when I went on to graduate school, I did in fact study marine ecology.
Very interesting. Thank you. That sounds like a very interesting career path. So our next question is, what is one of the coolest experiences that you've had as part of your career? So given all of that, I'm sure there's a lot of really cool experiences that you have had.
Yeah, so many different ones, and I think it's really hard to pinpoint anyone that I would definitely say is like my favorite. That's sort of a personal experience, but I think for me overall, after having been teaching for about 19 years, I think my absolute favorite, coolest experience is actually introducing students to these new habitats that they've never been to. In particular, taking students down to Belize is just always a thrill. Many of them have never been snorkeling. So to get them in the water the first time and be able to point out the different fish and the corals and all that kind of thing is just really exciting. And we always take an opportunity to do a night snorkel. So getting the students out on a coral reef at night with just a flashlight is nerve-wracking for them, but it's just so much fun to see the different organisms at night than what you see during the daytime. And to just watch them get comfortable and to just, you hear them talking to each other and poking their heads up, did you see the squid? Did you see the octopus? Like, all the cool things. So I think that's probably my favorite experience. And the great thing is I get to repeat it every time I teach the class.
Yeah, and do you have to be a student to do this? Because that sounds so fun.
Yeah, it's really a lot of fun. It is a class at NKU, so you do kind of have to be a student.
Well, who knows? Maybe you'll see me in class here soon. That sounds pretty awesome. So our next question is, what is a challenge that you faced on your journey and how did you overcome it? I know that personally, I find that I learn really well from other people's experiences, and that is the same for when I'm trying to overcome a challenge. I really appreciate learning how others overcame their challenges and trying to learn from those experiences and grow from those experiences of others. So can you tell us a little bit about a situation that you've had to overcome?
Sure. So in graduate school, doing that marine ecology degree, I don't know why I decided to do this particular project that involved night diving. It sounded really cool when I started, and it was, and it still is. Night diving is an amazing opportunity, but trying to get out to do a night dive is very difficult. So the weather has to be just right. You've got to have people to go diving with you. And a lot of them are graduate students at the time, and all of us have been working all day long on other projects. So trying to convince people to go out at night, I had to make sure that I could navigate and drive a boat to make sure we could get to the actual sites that we needed to go to and then get home safely. So there were just a lot of aspects beyond just this desire to answer this research question and, drop in the water and do a night dive. So when I first started, it didn't seem too terribly overwhelming, but then as, we started to really embrace the reality of the project, it became very challenging and started to be stressful. And especially when you can't get out as often and frequently as you need to. And so it became a challenge that I wasn't sure that I could overcome or quite how to get over that. So I really had to step back and think about whether the project was something that I really considered important enough that I wanted to complete, or if there was a different avenue that I could take, as well as trying to look at the project from a different perspective in terms of how could I get the work done without really burdening the other graduate students who were also trying to get their own projects done. And so I finally was able to connect with the Nature Conservancy down in the Florida Keys. They have this amazing volunteer network, and I was able to get a number of different people willing to come out and dive with me at night. Some of them were nice enough that they would actually take me out on their boats, use their own fuel and their own time to go out. And that was the difference between me being able to get finished with my research and having to change the project entirely. So I would encourage people, when you're faced with a challenge, to take a step back, think about other ways to approach that particular problem. Because really, if you can think about different aspects of it that maybe could be done slightly differently, be willing and open to different avenues, then I think it really helps you get through that challenge, and not feel like you have to just let go. That you can get through, just might not be quite the direction or the way that you thought initially.
And that's great advice, especially for right now, with everyone having to make a lot of changes and adapt to very different situations. So think creatively, think outside the box, don't give up. We are behind you, and there's a solution. Where there's a will, there's a way. So thank you. That's fantastic advice. Our next question is, what is some advice that you'd like to give any young person who is wanting to pursue a career in a STEM field?
Sure. So it's been really interesting to watch my kids kind of progress through school. And one of the things that I definitely would recommend is take advantage of opportunities at school to explore. So you have your set number of classes that you have to take, but you've always got electives in there. And I would encourage students to take advantage of trying new and different things. So if you've got something really cool at your middle school that you can take advantage of, or when you get to high school, maybe there's like an astronomy class or environmental science class or geology class, something that you don't have to take, but it's within the STEM field. It kind of broadens your horizons in terms of what's out there and what you can do. That's one thing I would recommend kind of starting with. And then when you move on and go to college, if you've chosen a particular STEM field, then I would encourage you while you're at college to try to connect with people in your field. Just because you say that you are going to be a physics major does not mean that there's one career out there that you are going to be when you graduate. There are
Right.
so many different things that you can do with any of these degrees. And if you can make an effort to connect with alumni or just people that maybe your university has connections with, that you can shadow them or talk to them or email them and find out a little bit more about what they do, I think that helps you to develop a sense of a goal at the end. It's not about, I'm just going to get finished with that degree. I think having that career in view at the end sometimes gives you that extra push to really get through the tough times. Always, school is challenging, and STEM fields in particular can be very challenging, but having your eye on the reward at the end can really help you kind of push through and persevere.
Thank you. That's great advice. And we love hearing you advise to reach out to others, reach out to professionals that are in those fields. We encourage everyone to reach out. If you see somebody on one of these videos or even the Discovery Channel or something like that, it never hurts to reach out to folks. We know from our interview with Allison Rogers from WLWT, she started in meteorology from reaching out to her local meteorologist. So you never know who you're going to be able to get into contact with, and taking that chance is always great. We encourage everyone to reach out and talk to people and learn from others. It's a great way to keep learning. So we do have a couple other questions from the audience members. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. So the first one is, what are some invasive plants that people should be looking for in their yards and in their communities, and how can they help to eliminate those plants? A lot of people are doing some gardening right now. The weather is warm, things are blooming. What are some things that we as community members can look out for to help our local environment?
Sure. So We have a wide variety of invasive plants in our area, unfortunately. So I'll highlight just a few that are relatively easy to identify. The first one is the calorie pear. So this is a tree, doesn't get terribly tall, kind of makes an oval shape, and it has white blooms in the pretty early spring. So they're almost done blooming at this point. But as you drive by the road, on the sides of the road, you'll probably see lots of white flowering trees. Those are all the calorie pear, and essentially they were used as a landscape plant and then they've escaped. So if you can remove any from your own yard, then I would recommend that, and it will help to reduce all of the invasion that's going on into the public spaces. The next one is the honeysuckle, specifically the amber honeysuckle. This is a shrub honeysuckle, so we do have some native honeysuckles here, so be careful that you're identifying them correctly. This particular one has come from Asia, and it is the very first plant to green up in the spring and one of the very last plants to lose its leaves in the fall. It also has red berries in the fall, and it blooms in, I think, in about June. The problem with this plant, there's really kind of two issues. The first is that it creates an incredibly shaded environment in the woods. So they just, as I said, leaf out really early. And so there's really not a lot of sunlight getting down to the forest floor. And there are all kinds of native plants that really thrive and depend on that early spring sunlight for them to be able to grow and reproduce. And the honeysuckle shades that all out and essentially eliminates those populations. The other issue is that the honeysuckle produces what's called an allelochemical. So it's a chemical that the plant releases to try to prevent other plants from growing nearby, which is also bad, meaning that there are other plants that are no other plants that'll be able to grow near that particular one. So removing that from your yard can be a chore. It certainly was at my house, but chopping that down and then just kind of leave the stump and just keep removing all the little brand new suckers that keep coming up, and eventually it'll die. You don't actually have to dig it out of the ground. Another one that is blooming right now is called the lesser celandine, and it's a small flower. The plant itself is very, very short, bright yellow, kind of shiny, waxy petals. And the problem with this, it's lovely and it looks really pretty, but it just smothers everything. So it spreads very quickly via seed, and it just moves over an area, and it's incredible. And unfortunately, it's like that honeysuckle in that it just shades out and outcompetes everything else. So if you have this, I would highly recommend removing it by simply cutting at the base of the plant. That way you're not disturbing the soil and bringing any other seeds for the celandine kind of up to the surface. You just clip it back, and you might have to do it a couple of times. You can even mow the area if it's in an easily accessible spot. And then the last one that I'll mention is garlic mustard. This one gets about a foot tall, and it has a white bloom. You can also control this one by clipping the plant down at the base or even mowing over that area as well.
Okay. And then one, I'm not a Cincinnati native, and one that I have noticed since I've lived here is bamboo. There seems to be bamboo in a lot of places. I know there's some in my backyard. Is that, it's obviously not native, but is it invasive? Is it something that, folks should be concerned about having as part of their landscape? Tell us a little bit about that.
So, bamboo, you're right, it's not native to our area. And one of the big issues with bamboo is that it spreads via a runner. So it's not like it's like sending seeds out and it happens to, grow here, grow there. It's this mass plant that just sends out runners in all directions. And each of those runners then pops up and you get a new plant. So it can be a really big issue. It's kind of like a forest spreading on its own in a sense, but it grows very, very quickly. So one problem, of course, is that your neighbors are not going to be real happy with you, because if it's planted close to the fence line, it will end up in their yard as well. So I don't recommend planting bamboo. If you want something to provide a screen at your house, then I would suggest some native grasses. So we've got a number of different varieties. those that can handle sunlight and some that prefer shade. The really nice thing about using the natives of any kind, but some of the grasses as well, is that they provide a host for caterpillars of a variety of moths and butterflies. So not only are you providing that screen that you're looking for, but you're also helping our pollinators.
Okay, thank you very much. And then our last question is sort of a bigger one. Um, it's like the big finale question. So, how can people in our community, young adults, kids, families, everyone, get involved in projects to promote pollination and pollinators? And then, can they build these gardens themselves? If they can, what types of plants should be going into those gardens? And then, what types of critters should they expect to see? We don't want anyone to be surprised by any critters. But now the weather's getting nice and people have some time building gardens. I know I'm gardening. What are some ways that we can kind of help this initiative to help pollinators?
Sure. So there are a number of different things to think about when you're putting in a pollinator garden, and you can put in a pollinator garden from a few pots on your deck, if that's what you've got, or your balcony, to putting in a larger landscaped area. But if you focus on native plants, you really can't go wrong. One thing that I would kind of recommend too is that don't always just put in what we would call a forb or a flowering plant. Also remember to put in some shrubs, some trees, those kinds of things, because they serve as hosts, again, for a lot of our pollinator species. For example, oak trees support over 500 different species of butterflies and moths as a host plant, meaning that moths and butterflies lay their eggs, caterpillars eat the oak leaves, and then you have that nice, healthy population of caterpillars, which then is available for birds to eat. So it really helps, that kind of move up that food chain. So don't forget about the trees. For the flowering plants, again, stick with natives. One thing you really want to pay attention to is, when do they bloom? So we have about 400 or more species of native bees in our area. And I should point out that they don't sting. And these native bees are reliant on things that are blooming at the time that they're active. So some of our bee species are active throughout the summer, but others are active only for about 6 to 8 weeks out of that entire summer, spring season. So we have some bees that start to emerge in late March, early April, and they're only here until, May. So one thing to keep in mind is that you really need to have something blooming so that they can get some nectar and food while they're out trying to collect the nectar and the pollen so they can reproduce. And same goes for those that are out later in the summer and then through the fall. The monarch, of course, is very iconic. Having milkweed in your garden is really important, because that's a host plant, and it's the only one that the monarch will lay its eggs on. The pawpaw tree is the only one the zebra swallowtail will lay its eggs on. So the host plants become really critical parts of your garden. But having food sources also for these pollinators is really crucial. So for the monarch, as it's coming through in September and even into October, it's important to have plants blooming like goldenrod and ironweed and asters, so that they can get the fuel that they need to make it all the way down to Mexico as part of their migration. So really consider having those plants blooming throughout the season. And again, as long as you're focused on the natives, then you should be just fine. And if you need help finding native plants and native plant lists, the Ohio Department of Natural Protection has lists the plants by sort of their habitat, like upland woods or open prairie or wetland. And so you should be able to find some suggestions there.
Perfect. Thank you. That is a great resource and great advice. Thank you very, very much. That is all we have for today. Dr. Robertson, thank you so much for taking the time and teaching us all about the world of ecology and pollinators. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course, and thank you all for tuning in and watching. We hope that you learned some new useful information, especially in this gardening weather that we have. So we hope that you will take the initiative and try to go out there and look for those invasive plants and get some pollinator gardens going. And if you build one, please send us a picture. We would love to see it. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please keep learning with us through these videos for STEM Girls Virtual, our dance parties, our story tree times, our vintage beauties videos, all of the things that Cincinnati Museum Center is doing. And keep learning, Cincinnati. Bye, everyone.